done with smoke and mirrors. We got a math problem.
We're all in agreement on the reforms we want to make.
Those 5 no votes, I think it was 5, just voted for the biggest tax increase in American history.
We're going to resolve this as quickly as we can and hopefully have a vote ideally on Monday.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Tonight on America Decides, one topic for the full hour. It's the Trump tax and spending agenda, now grinding its way through the House of Representatives. By the way, the president would like it to grind its way faster. More on that in a minute. I've covered many of these bills, and there is a tendency to focus on the where and who, not the what. Where means where is it in the legislative process? Where are the political fault lines? Who is objecting? Where is the president on the hard questions? All of that matters, and we will have fresh reporting on that tonight. But frequently left aside is the what. What's in the bill? How will it change your life? What choices are being made in your name? That is our focus tonight. It will be, I warn you, a bit wonky, lots of numbers, spinach, broccoli, not friendly TV, but important. We won't get to everything in the House bill, but we will tell you if it passes as written, lots of things will change for you and people around you. What tax rate you pay, how much you can deduct from your taxes, what you pay for a car loan, what the government will give you if you have a child, how much you can keep in tip and overtime income, whether the poor where you live will have health care or food assistance, how much money philanthropies will have for charity and universities for tuition assistance. And that is just a start. CBS News is also tracking a 7-2 Supreme Court decision to keep in place an order preventing, that is to say, preventing the Trump administration from deporting Venezuelans under the Alien Enemies Act in the Northern District of Texas. My colleague, Lindsay Reiser, will have more on that decision and its possible ramifications the next hour on the Daily Report. Now, back to Capitol Hill and our focus on the reconciliation bill. To help us get on our wonky and very numbers-heavy and process-heavy way, I'm very happy to bring in CBS News congressional correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns. Caitlin, take it away.
Hey, Major. Well, it seems like today the president's big, beautiful bill, as he is calling it, hit a big road bump. The bill was supposed to be voted out of the Budget Committee. This is just a process to get this bill through the House. That was voted down today. About 4 Republicans, conservative Republicans, joined all Democrats on the panel to vote against it. And this is a big hurdle for the president, for House leadership in trying to get this through Congress. Basically, the deadline that House Speaker Mike Johnson has set is next Friday, just a week from now, before Memorial Day and before the recess. It has to get through the various committees first, and the Budget Committee had to get it through today. Now, they are going to reconvene Sunday night at 10 p.m., Major, Sunday night appointment viewing on C-SPAN to try to get this through again. But big hurdles still remain, a lot of sticking points, especially with those conservatives. You have all the while President Trump trying to exert some pressure here as well.
One of those who's disappointed is South Carolina Republican Ralph Norman. Let's take a listen to what he had to say today.
All of us are very disappointed with the progress or lack of that was made. I'm done with smoke and mirrors. We got a math problem, pure and simple.
When he says smoke and mirrors, what does he mean, Caitlin?
Well, remember, conservatives wanted deeper cuts than that which are in the bill right now as it stands. And there's a particular sticking point when it comes to what conservatives want. Some of these committees were charged with finding $880 billion in spending cuts. A lot of that was targeted at social safety net programs like Medicaid. And in that provision in Medicaid, they added in this bill new work requirements for Medicaid recipients. However, those wouldn't be phased in for another few years. And conservative lawmakers want that phased in now, sooner than what is in the legislation to get those savings now. Presumably, the theory is that if you have these work requirements that would likely kick some people off of the program that they believe should not be on it if they are able to work. Now, that is a sticking point that remains among conservatives. Conservatives are also upset about what the moderates are asking for, which is a higher cap, a higher deduction cap on your state and local taxes. That all helps to pay for the bill. So you have these two factions, very, very different, but really underscore the really difficult balancing act that the House Speaker and leadership have to strike to get this bill through.
Balancing acts at 10 p.m. on Sunday evening. Should be fun to watch. Caitlin Huey-Burns, thanks so much. Joining me now, Florida Democratic Representative Kathy Castor. She serves on the House Energy and Commerce Committee. Congresswoman, great to have you with us. Your committee passed through things that I know you do not approve of on Medicaid. We'll get to that in a second. But the House Budget Committee today failed to pass this through. Do you feel Republicans are losing the thread here? Do you think this legislation could fail?
It could die of its own weight because it is such a reckless and irresponsible proposal. The issue I hear mostly from my neighbors back home is it's all about the cost of living. And what the Republicans have put forward is a tax giveaway for billionaires that is funded by taking away health care from many of our neighbors and asking them to pay more on their electric bill. Meanwhile, they don't make up the difference and add trillions of dollars to the debt. This is not what the average American is hoping Washington will do when they send us here to solve problems.
The White House today put out a statement saying this piece of legislation must pass. And one of the reasons it highlighted was that the legislation that came out of your committee dealing with Medicaid would knock 1.4 million undocumented immigrants off Medicaid, which they said is a significant reform. Do you accept that number, 1.4 million, and would you vote for that in isolation?
You know, what we learned in our committee was that that was fake news, that if you are undocumented in America, you do not qualify for Medicaid. So this is part of their strategy to distract you with hot button issues. They say that Medicaid is rife with waste, fraud, and abuse, and there's some common ground there. But most of what they are proposing goes to the heart of the people who rely on it. Maybe a child with complex conditions, maybe your mother or father in a rehab center, or wanting to live their life at home and avoid having to go to a nursing center. The independent CBO says that almost 14 million Americans will lose health coverage under the current draft of the Republican tax giveaway.
One of the issues that was before your committee was work requirements for eligibility. And I want to read to you something that the Wall Street Journal editorialized. It said as follows, quote, Medicaid isn't for men in their 30s checking out of society and watching YouTube. It's for low-income mothers and children with medical needs. How do you respond to that?
Everything we've learned about paperwork requirements says that is just bureaucratic red tape and a way to keep people off of Medicaid. Just bury them in paperwork, shorten enrollment periods. If you are on Medicaid and you are able-bodied, you're likely working, or you're a student, you're in school, or you're taking care of someone, you're a caregiver. So that is also a distraction from what they firmly intend to continue to work on, a big tax giveaway to the wealthy and the well-connected, paid for by hardworking Americans, their health care and their electric bills.
And when the Wall Street Journal points out that the reimbursement rate for men on Medicaid is 90%, but 50% to 77% for pregnant women and the blind, is that incorrect?
Well, you're talking about apples and oranges. Yes. Remember, under the Affordable Care Act, where we outlaw discrimination for pre-existing conditions, we allow young people now to stay in their parents' policies until age 26. part of the ACA was Medicaid expansion, and many states, about 40 states across the country, have expanded Medicaid to a larger population. That's good news. When you can cover people, keep them out of the emergency room, that has a positive effect on everyone's insurance bills. Now we need to go farther, and the answer isn't rip care away or make it more expensive. It's to continue on reforms to make sure that all Americans are covered.
And when you talk about reforms, what are the things you would be open to within Medicaid to control costs and make it more practical as a budget mechanism and for people who receive the benefits?
First of all, you do have to go tackle the improper payments. I also wrote a letter just yesterday to the Inspector General of Health and Human Services about a strange diversion of funds in Florida where Governor DeSantis was caught taking Medicaid proceeds from a settlement and sending it through political action committees. There is a lot of provider fraud out there. Those are things that I would hope we can all agree on. But the answer certainly isn't ripping that coverage away and leaving vulnerable people to fend for themselves. And then the other piece that hasn't gotten a lot of play out there is, America is in the midst of a manufacturing boom because of clean energy investments that Democrats passed a few years ago. 400,000 jobs have been created, and it's helped people afford to replace heat pumps and AC, insulate their homes, and that's also in the crosshairs of the Republicans. They are doing the bidding of the big oil and gas companies. All of the projections are now, if you take away clean energy investments and double down on oil and gas, you're going to cut jobs, and consumers are likely to pay more on their electric bills, maybe as much as $100 per month.
Congressman, I want to ask you this question before I let you go. I've covered a lot of reconciliation bills dating back to the early 1990s. I've been around a very long time. The iron rule is they always pass. They go through lots of ups and downs. They go through lots of speed bumps. Lots of people get angry. They pound the table. But ultimately, the pressure from the White House, the imperative of the majority party prevails, and these things pass. You opened this conversation saying it's possible this thing could die of its own weight. Do you still believe that?
I do, but it's up to the American people. If they also believe that they deserve a little bit of tax relief rather than billionaires and the wealthy and well-connected, they need to speak up. If they value their health care and Medicaid or under the Affordable Care Act, they need to be outspoken now too. If they don't want their electric bills to go up and they want to continue this clean energy manufacturing boom across the country. But there are a lot of powerful special interests in Washington, D.C., and I know the president has made certain promises that he wants to follow through on. But at this moment in time, people are talking about the cost of living, especially with the added expenses of the tariffs. So the Republicans really need to go back to the drawing board and not focus on the richest people in America. Focus on the hardworking Americans. They're the ones that really need the help.
Florida Democratic Representative Kathy Castor. Congresswoman, thank you so much.
Thank you, Major.
Here's a fact. The U.S. economy is the largest in the world, but its debt outweighs that distinction by trillions. Coming up, we'll explain why that's a problem and how increasing the debt with the latest budget proposal might actually hurt average Americans. That's next. You're watching America Decides. Let's dig into the U.S. economy and our current cycle of deficit spending and rising national debt. The U.S. economy is $30 trillion. Now, you and I cannot fathom what a trillion of anything is. Dollars, donuts, dishes, but a little bit later in the show, I'll try to help out with that. In the meantime, at $30 trillion, the U.S. economy is the world's largest, but it has a debt problem. The national debt today is $36.2 trillion. Now, how should we think about that? Well, economists care about the ratio of national debt to the size of the economy. What is that for the U.S. right now? It's 123%. In 1990, the year I came to Washington, the ratio was 55%. Now, that's a picture of me in 1991. Scary, isn't it? What a punk I look like. Anyway, In 2010, the ratio was 91%. It crested at 126% in the pandemic year of 2020. The danger zone, experts agree, is anything above 100%. We are there, big time. The debt is made up of all the accumulated deficits in years past, and we have had many. The last balanced federal budget was in 2001. What's our deficit now? Well, last year it was $1.8 trillion, and this year it is projected to be higher. Higher deficits mean a larger national debt, and that ratio we've been talking about just gets worse. The debt is our national credit card. Because we are the U.S. and foreign investors trust us, we finance our debt at pretty favorable interest rates. The average rate the U.S. government paid last year was around 3.3%. You might think to yourself, wait, that's much lower than I paid for a home or car loan on my credit card, and you would be right. And yet, even with that favorable interest rate, we spent $1.1 trillion just on debt payments last year. That's more than we spent on defense, Medicare, Medicaid, veterans benefits, or safety net programs. Any legislation that adds the deficits or debt makes those interest payments, payments that don't provide a service to anyone or stimulate any economic activity, higher. For deeper insight into all this, I'm happy to bring to the table Maya McGinnis. She's the president of the nonpartisan Nonprofit Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. Maya, great to have you with us.
Thank you, Major.
Does this bill, currently before the House of Representatives, sponsored by the White House and House Republican leadership, make the problems I just outlined better or worse?
Yeah, and that's the litmus test, because as you just laid out, we are at this point of what could soon be no return, how bad the fiscal situation is. Unequivocally, this bill would make it worse. This is talking about when you look at all of the borrowing and you subtract all the offsets, you're still looking at borrowing of over $3 trillion. And that is before you account for the fact that there are gimmicks in this bill, meaning a lot of the tax cuts would expire after 4 years. That's where we are right now. Like the expired tax cuts from before are all being extended. The same thing would likely happen, and that would be another $2 trillion. So we're easily talking about $5 trillion added to a debt at a time when we absolutely should be going in the opposite direction.
Are there options that are not being looked at to bring this more into balance?
Yes. I mean, okay, so putting this into perspective, over the budget window, the next 10 years, we will be spending $86 trillion. Now, not all of those things can be addressed in reconciliation, but $86 trillion, and this budget is aspiring to save $2. And that's from
$2 trillion.
$2 trillion. It's better than the Senate, where they're aspiring to $4 billion with a B. So it really is for a time when it's unified Republican House, Senate, and White House, and there's been a lot of talk about smaller government cutting spending, the spending reductions are absolutely minuscule. However, they are all going to offset tax cuts, which would make the situation worse. Yes, they would create growth, but not nearly enough to offset the overall costs. If you look for larger savings, there are many to be found: Medicare, other things, more structural things in Medicaid, many other programs that the Ways and Means Committee oversees, and spending through the tax code. We, over the budget window, will probably lose about $20 trillion in spending programs through the tax code.
Meaning
we could
subsidies.
Be looking there. Yep, expenditures, deductions, exemptions, the things that make the tax code Swiss cheese. There's so much to be done there, which would actually broaden the tax base and be part of pro-growth tax reform rather than making the tax code more complicated.
As you well know, President Trump frequently uses his outside voice. But sometimes there's an inside voice, a very small, low modulated inside voice. And with that, he has said, well, you could raise taxes on the wealthy.
Yeah.
You could even take away some of the loopholes that allow those people who obtain profits from general partnerships. It's known as carried interest. He said you could even do that. This bill doesn't. And that would provide some revenue, would it not?
Yeah, so we've put out a whole budget offsets bank with over $50 trillion in options of various things it could do. And absolutely, those are some of the policies that would make sense. So you could look at rate increases at the higher end. There was real interest in talk about that. You could talk about base broadeners. Carried interest is something that could and should be altered. Many people have talked about it. I thought that was a great suggestion. It doesn't save a lot of money, but it's an important start. But yes, there are many more places to be looking. When we are talking about a budget that will be, again, over $80 trillion over a decade, there are many areas that we could be making changes. But I think the bottom line is, if you're not willing to make them, You can't have that big a tax cut. And these tax cuts, it's not just extending old tax cuts, it's putting in new additional tax cuts at a time where we should be putting in place a debt deal to reduce our borrowing, not increase it.
When you and I first met in the 90s, there was a significant bipartisan focus on this issue. People took hard votes, made hard proposals with Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. It seems, Maya, in our lifetime here in Washington, not only has that curiosity diminished, but the political will behind it has almost completely evaporated. And one of the reasons I believe that's happened, and I'd like your impression of this, is back in the 90s, people said, well, if we keep raising the debt, it's all going to collapse. And it never did. And so people think it never will.
I agree with your assessment completely. So I think there have been a number of changes. The fiscal situation is much worse than it used to be. And the way it was before is that it kind of moved your fiscal situation along with the business cycle. You borrowed when you should. If there's a pandemic, for instance, you should borrow when there was a recession. And then in between, during strong periods of growth, we'd bring that borrowing down and often run budget surpluses. It has completely changed now where we borrow for emergencies and we borrow for non-emergencies. We borrow when we even borrow during periods of high inflation, which is really damaging. And I think that that's changed because, one, there's more polarization, and you have both parties not being as cooperative as they used to be and basically trying to outcompete each other with giveaways. You have this tax cut? Well, I'm going to give you this tax cut and spending increase. It used to be that government, that you thought of Republicans as wanting spending tax cuts and Democrats wanting spending increases. And honestly, they both want both at this point. But it's an excellent point about interest rates. The fact that interest rates didn't go up when we thought they were going to for a long time, people started saying, I guess rates will be low forever. Don't worry, borrow more. That is not the case. There are a lot of things that kept them artificially low during that period. But we've borrowed so much that now just small increases in interest rates lead to huge increases in the interest payments you were talking about. Fastest growing part of the budget, interest payments. And it's like a credit card teaser rate. We are dangerously dependent on those low interest rates, and they do not look like they will stay in place.
Maya McGinnis, what a pleasure to have you here. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Major.
Billions of dollars in climate-related funding are on the chopping block in the proposed budget before the House of Representatives. How this could hurt businesses, renewable energy, and consumers. That's next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back. So glad you're staying with us. Washington, as you might have noticed, has a language all its own. Words that mean a lot here, but nowhere else. Why? Because most Americans, for very good reason, have no idea what these Beltway buzzwords mean. One of those is reconciliation. So what is that? Well, put simply, it's a way to get a very big piece of legislation through Congress without having to worry about a Senate filibuster. That means a majority party and a working president can do a great many things with very big consequences for your wallet, your health care, the environment, immigration, regulations, all without having to find 60 votes in the Senate. President Obama used reconciliation to pass Obamacare. President Trump used it to open drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Ronald Reagan used it to pass the biggest tax cut in American history. Sorry, President Trump, your 2017 tax cut, which also used reconciliation, ranks as the 8th largest tax cut. President Biden used reconciliation to pass the $2 trillion COVID-era American Rescue Plan. So how do we get this word, reconciliation? Well, this part will sound familiar. Once upon a time, Congress was enraged that a president was trying to kill spending Congress had already approved. This president was accused of exercising imperial powers and trampling on the Constitution. Where have I heard that before? The president in question was Richard Nixon. In 1974, Congress passed the Budget Act to take power from Nixon. Politically weakened by the Watergate scandal, Nixon signed the law on July 12th, less than a month before he would resign the presidency. The law did many things we talk about today. It created the Budget Committee for the House and the Senate. Trump's bill stalled today in the House Budget Committee, and it can't pass without winning approval there. The law also created the Congressional Budget Office, a nonpartisan set of economists and analysts who tell Congress how much a bill will cost or save or how it will affect people receiving benefits. How the CBO scores legislation tells the country what it will do. As an example, the CBO score tells us under the Trump bill, now before Congress, at least 8 million people, possibly more, will lose Medicaid health care benefits. That's our primer on reconciliation. We're bringing our reporter panel. Laura Davison is the Washington Deputy Bureau Chief for Bloomberg. Daniela Diaz, congressional reporter for Notice. Remember, Notice News of the U.S. So we have some news this afternoon on this budgetary front. Moody's downgraded the United States credit rating to AA1 from AAA, saying in part, successive U.S. administrations and Congress have failed to agree on measures to reverse the trend of large annual fiscal deficits and growing interest costs. So Moody's is paying attention to this. Maybe others will be as well. That overhangs this conversation about the future of this very big reconciliation bill, does it not?
Yes, big picture speaking, this is a very minor downgrade, and it acknowledges that U.S. debt is still a very, very safe asset. But if this continues to be a trend, and some of the fiscal outlook that Maya was just talking about, suggests that we are on a bad path, that could mean that U.S. debt is no longer seen by investors, by markets, by foreign governments as a safe asset, which means that our ability to deficit finance our government's projects and proposals goes down significantly. So the U.S. has remained the global economic superpower. The dollar has been the safe haven asset it is because of our view of we're seen as the safest place to go. So as this debate continues, if markets, if ratings agencies are no longer convinced that the U.S. will be able to have a sustainable fiscal outlook, this could really change our ability to do big tax and spending programs in the future.
And Daniela, based on your reporting this week, how do House Republicans proceed? They had a very significant speed bump today.
Very significant indeed. I mean, we kind of saw what happened just a couple of hours ago coming after we saw Chip Roy, conservative fiscal hawk, House Freedom Caucus members say, I won't support this unless there's stronger cuts in this bill. I've been very clear with leadership. I have been talking to legislative aides, White House aides. Important to note, Trump is not here. That might be a factor of why this all played out today. He's currently on his Middle East tour, not actually able to meet with Republicans in person. But this was coming and not a huge surprise. I was reporting all week, talking to Republicans, that they did not have the votes to get this through the Budget Committee. There's a lot of frustration toward Budget Chair Jody Arrington, saying that he called for this vote, knowing that there was not enough support. Of course, there were 4 Republicans that voted against this. 1 voted against it, Lloyd Smucker, to be very clear, as a procedural move so that they could bring it up, as we noted earlier in this show, at 10 p.m. on Sunday, which pretty wild that they're planning to have this hearing so late on Sunday, maybe to have them tired and
maybe
go through this
tired
process
or
quickly.
having accumulated 48 hours of Trump echo chamber on social media hammering them this weekend.
And it was really notable, Major,
That's what's going to happen.
That's exactly what's going to happen. And he actually had his post on Truth Social while they were in the hearing room saying, I endorse this. It's important for this legislation to pass. That did not seem to get these guys across the finish line today during the budget meeting. But they did say on social media that they're planning to be here all weekend and hash this out and try to reach this deal. And look, Leader Scalise has said one of the major sticking points is those work requirements that are supposed to kick in 4 years to kick people off, potentially to kick people off Medicaid. That is essentially what fiscal Republicans are wanting, could kick in sooner. That is something that Chip Roy and these other conservatives wanted. So if they get that, they might change their tune on this.
So, Laura, I want to ask you about some of the finer details within this legislation. One dealing with auto loans and deductions that you might receive if you get a new auto loan.
Yes, this is something that Trump very aptly on the campaign trail unveiled in Detroit, Motor City. And basically the idea here is that you would be able to write off the interest on your auto loan, much how you're able to do that on the mortgage interest on your home, that this would also be a deduction if the car is made in America. So this really dovetails with Trump's broader economic strategy here. If he wants more cars to be made in America, he wants more people to buy cars to stimulate consumer demand. And by doing that, they get a tax break on at least a portion of the cost of the loan.
There's also legislation that would change the way private foundations and philanthropies are taxed. Yeah. That could have some significant implications for American generosity and how philanthropies are able to address the needs of those they serve.
Yes, I want to be very clear that this specifically affects private foundations, which is just a small sliver of charity. So most churches or synagogues or local food banks would not be affected by this, but larger organizations, specifically think like the Ford Foundation, the Gates Foundation, really big engines of philanthropic giving in the country, will have this new tax that would be placed on them, essentially to limit their growth. This is kind of behind Trump's strategy of saying he's not really for what some of these big groups are doing in terms of environmental work, in terms of DEI, in terms of public health that don't align with his worldview. Similarly, there's also a tax expanded on university endowments. So these would largely affect places like Harvard, Stanford, Yale, that he has very famously been feuding with, looking to also get rid of their tax-exempt status.
And this is not something we've seen in the tax code before. I mean, to go sort of this granularly in these directions.
Yes, this is very new. I mean, tax-exempt organizations are tax-exempt for a reason. The idea here is that they don't pay taxes.
And perceived foes are being singled out. Danielle, I want to ask you about what you think next week should bring and what people should look for. Obviously, the Budget Committee, if it doesn't get through there, it's stalled permanently. But if it does, there's still some more hurdles.
Yeah, we're going to see them meet on Sunday night, potentially pass this. That seems like where it's headed. A very late night vote that will happen when we're all asleep. I won't be asleep. Hopefully, y'all are asleep. But that would tee up a Rules Committee vote, another procedural hurdle, to get this for a vote on the House floor before Memorial Day, which is, of course, that self-imposed deadline that Speaker Mike Johnson has been saying again and again from the very beginning that that's what he wants done so that they can send it to the Senate, which is a whole other obstacle there that we haven't touched. We won't get into that.
We'll save the Senate for another day.
We'll save the Senate for another day. But it's interesting today, all the conservatives got the attention, but the moderates are going to be who we need to watch after this happens.
They will have their run next week.
They will have their one next week, and one is already very angry, texting my colleague, Haley Bird, that Don Bacon, incredibly upset that this happened today, that the conservatives are outspoken about this because it's moderates who are, of course, upset about the increasing the SALT cap. They need to be able to bring these bills home to their districts, and cutting Medicaid could be potentially very dangerous for them politically.
Right.
So I don't know how leadership is going to do this. It's going to be very difficult.
Indeed, but there's a kind of phrase that always circulates around these discussions. In the end, moderates always fold.
Moderates tend to fold, absolutely. And
we'll
I think
see if that happens next week. Laura Davison, Daniela Diaz, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Tracy Wolf joins us now for more on how the proposed budget of the president and the Republicans might affect climate-related funding. She is the senior coordinating producer for the CBS News Climate Unit. So, Tracy, what do you have for us?
Well, listen, Major, I think the beauty of this bill lies in the eyes of the beholder because it's going to cut billions of dollars from climate funding. It will be rolling back environmental regulation, and it's going to prematurely end tax credits that a lot of Americans have utilized. You know, the other part of this bill is it's going to raise energy prices. It's going to raise the cost of natural gas. It will kill a lot of jobs, and it's indiscriminate. It's going to affect everyone across the country.
And when Republicans talk about this bill as unleashing American energy dominance, what are they driving at, or what are they trying to describe?
Well, I think what they're trying to do with this bill is they're trying to cut clean energy tax provisions that were supporting clean energy development in this country. There's also other provisions of the bill that are going to support fossil fuel development. So, I mean, you can see where they're putting, all of their interests here. And at the end of the day, it's going to make energy more expensive for all Americans.
And isn't it true right now, Tracy, that there is a kind of integrated, phrase is all the above energy strategy, and even red states, Texas comes to mind, have leaned in the direction of renewables and are using them?
I mean, it's an interesting question, Major, because Texas had a really big weather issue a couple years ago in 2021 when they weren't able to keep the power on. And a big reason they've been able to avoid blackouts and brownouts is because of its investment in renewable energy. That is the least expensive type of energy that we can get online fastest right now. And so a big reason why Republicans are actually starting to really question whether or not some of these cuts in the reconciliation bill are wise is because the amount of money that has gone towards clean energy investment has predominantly supported Republican districts. Some of the districts that have seen billions of dollars of investment and jobs are red ones.
And that's possibly a political fault line. We'll see if that becomes a political fault line in the House, maybe in the Senate, but it is something worth watching. Tracy Wolf, thank you so much for that perspective and those facts. I really appreciate it. The president may have his budget plan, but he's got to get House Republicans in order first. Next, we'll talk to a former House Ways and Means Committee Chairman, Kevin Brady, about how that's going to work. That will be fascinating to hear. More on America Decides in just a minute.
The fact is, if we don't pass a tax bill, it'll be the single largest tax increase in American history, and that's not something I support. At the same token, I'm not going to just settle for a number that was shoved down our throats by the Ways and Means Committee.
In our amendment, we will ensure the tax cuts continue for everyone making under $1 billion in this country. We had the vote. Every single Democrat voted for this amendment to provide that tax relief, and every single Republican opposed it.
On this very show earlier this week, members of Congress weighed in on the reconciliation process, which is our entire focus tonight. It hit a snag today, as we've been discussing. Here to give us some insight on that, how long this snag might last, former Republican Congressman from Texas, Kevin Brady. Importantly, he served as the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee from 2015 to 2019. Kevin, I'm so glad you joined us. Thanks so much. How are you, sir?
Major, it's great to see you again. Thanks for having me.
So you've seen this play out this week. Tell my audience what to keep an eye on next week, and do you believe in the end Republicans will coalesce and pass this bill with all of its various changes by the end of next week?
Yeah, the short answer is yeah, I'm pretty confident they will. So what to look for? All along, the answer has been look at the savings number for Republicans, because it has to be adequate enough that it unlocks the Senate baseline that allows the president to make more of the tax cuts permanent. It also unlocks the total vote for this bill. And what you're seeing here is, in perspective, on the Budget Committee, each of the Republican committees actually met its full instructions on saving or spending that every conservative, almost all but one, voted for just a month or so ago. Here you have conservatives, some of them saying, well, you reached your goal, but we want you to do it a different way. So the negotiations, Major, are really about, can there adjustments be made that are acceptable to the committee, as well as the entire Republican conference in a number of areas. So I'm pretty confident working through the weekend, they'll be able to pull this back together for the budget vote on Sunday. I think there's a very high chance they get it to Rules Committee that sets the rules of debate by Monday or Tuesday. So yeah, I think they have time to be able to sort of reconcile some of these opinions here and bring the votes together.
Kevin, you know the president well. You know almost everyone in this House Republican conference well. When the president, as he did a couple of weeks ago, said he was open to raising taxes on the wealthy, anyone making more than $2.5 million a year, also said he could be open to changing the carried interest loophole, which basically benefits people in private equity, venture capital, hedge funds. Those are populist things. He leads a populist or more populist Republican Party. Why haven't Republicans taken him up on that offer and made some of these things easier to do with other revenue flows that wouldn't affect the vast majority of their constituents?
Well, I think the answer here is there's an honest disagreement of policy here. Obviously, Republicans in Congress are focused on very pro-growth, pro-competitive innovation policies that drive the economy, more importantly, drive jobs and rising paychecks. And they've got the proof that President Trump's original 2017 bill drove record wage growth in paychecks exactly, and small businesses. So you've got a bit of a disagreement on how best to achieve that. And I think the Republicans are making the wrong calls, including on carried interest, which doesn't benefit a few. Today, about 85% of that capital coming down to Main Street goes to small businesses. And so members of Congress are seeing capital that small businesses need to start up, to grow, to expand, readily available. It's crucial to them. And so it's really just an honest, different view on the value of some of these provisions.
And Kevin, I remember when the definition of the middle class in our country was 250,000. Then it went to 400,000. And as we just heard Brendan Boyle, the ranking Democrat on the Budget Committee, say every Democrat voted to not change the tax rate for anyone making less than $1 billion. So I guess that is expanded now up to $1 billion. They're for that.
Yeah. Well,
is that disingenuous?
I will just tell you, I think it's a bit of baloney here, in the sense he's citing an amendment the Democrats offered during the recent tax debate, just as we did during the Inflation Reduction Act and Build Back Better, to limit tax breaks in those bills to those less than $1 billion, and they vote against that. So I think that's probably more political theater than anything to do with policy.
You know this process very well. You were there front and center in 2017. There's anxiety, I don't know how pronounced it is, among House Republicans that if, in fact, they pass it, as you predicted they will, by next week, and the Senate gets involved, this thing will be reshapen in the Senate, and that could be problematic for House Republicans who cast this hard vote, or this vote that they feel is harder than they would prefer. Walk my audience through that process.
Yeah, so, there is a process, and it's much different in the House than the Senate, as I learned in 2017, and then as I chaired the conference committee to work out the differences between the two bills, it was enhanced even further. The bottom line is the Senate, is going to look at these provisions. There's been an awful lot of collaboration behind the scenes between House tax writers and Senate tax writers that I think will show themselves. Will there be some changes, perhaps in the IRA, perhaps in the Medicaid savings, perhaps in other areas? Yes. Are any of them, I think, such great changes that they can't be accepted with negotiation with the House? I hope not. I don't think they will. I think they'll stay, unless I'm reading it wrong, I think they're going to stay on track to finish this by July 4th or sometime in that month.
And the debt ceiling is increased in this legislation. That's super important as a kind of propellant for this legislation, is it not? Because that's kind of an implied deadline.
Yeah, it really is, Major. You're right on there. We expect, or Treasury expects, that sort of that crucial timing happens in August. No one wants to run up close to that. And so, yes, it adds urgency to the timing here. They've always, what I found in 2017 was setting very aggressive timetables was very helpful, trying to pull people together. Reconciliation, taxes, savings cuts, it is a difficult job in the best of circumstances. And now with some days, it feels like a near zero majority in the House, that degree of difficulty is very high. So I think all that's reflected in the work that's being done.
Excellent analysis. You've been through it. You've lived it. You know the politics. You know the policy. Former Congressman Kevin Brady, thanks so much.
Good to see you.
Rural hospitals could be forced to close if President Trump's budget plan becomes law. How remote hospitals are watching this ongoing debate. That's next here on America Decides. Welcome back. By the way, happy Friday. Earlier this week, the House Energy and Commerce Committee completed its work on the budget package. The panel was tasked with reducing the future growth of Medicaid by $880 billion over a decade, including trimming back Medicaid allocations for certain programs. Our Nicole Killian visited a rural hospital in Virginia to get a sense of the potential impact.
We recently sat down with Mark Nance, president and CEO of Valley Health System. It runs several hospitals in Virginia and West Virginia. And to give you a sense of how critical this issue is, he typically visits Capitol Hill about once a year, but he's already been here 3 times this year to lobby lawmakers over the GOP mega bill.
When folks in Congress are calling Medicaid direct payment programs fraud, waste, and abuse, money laundering, I mean, that's just simply not true. But if that were to go away, then again, I go from immediately to about a $65 million loss a year. There's a chance we can't fulfill our mission.
Nance told me he considers his hospital centers as a ministry. He said a substantial portion of the patients that come through the system are on Medicaid. In some cases, it's about 25%, but he said in more rural areas, that number can be even higher. He understands that there may be changes to the Medicaid program, but ultimately he hopes it results in a workable solution.
Nicole Killian, thank you. Remember I told you I was going to help you with $1 trillion? Well, $1 trillion in seconds is 31,546 years. And $1 trillion bills laid end to end, 96.6 million miles farther from the Earth to the sun. I hope that helps. That does it for today. I'll be back with another edition of America Decides Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report coming up next right here on CBS News 24/7.